What's up, everybody? It's Dr. Scott with a Full Body Fix. Today we're going to answer the question, can my knees go past my toes in a squat? Okay, so there's definitely a myth out there that the knees traveling forward of the toes will cause increased shear force into the joint and lead to either stretching or lengthening of the ligaments and lead toward increased incidence of knee injuries. That's been pretty much patently proven to be false. That was based on some old research that was a little sketchy. We've kind of moved on from that, and so I want to break this myth down and talk about some reality around it. So the big thing is, the thing with the knee is it's a hinge joint, and most people, outside of folks with a lot of arthritis, etc., have no issue in getting full knee flexion or extension. Again, we're generalizing, but most people who have trouble getting into a full depth squat have actually an ankle issue, that's definitely more common, hip tightness, very common, or low back / posterior chain instability, meaning their glutes aren't firing well, their low back doesn't fire real well, or doesn't move real well. Usually the knee is just sort of there. Again, this is outside of structural damage. So the big thing is, when we're talking about knee traveling forward of the toe, is we wouldn't want to just keep that knee behind the toe just for it doing that, especially not to compromise the low back. And this is what I see a lot of people do. They sort of start moving and then they compromise the low back just to try to keep the knees shin vertical, right? This is not really good squat technique. And then the other point is, which joint moves first? When we're talking about a really sound squat, the first joint that should move is actually the hips. It's this motion, hips back. And that's a cue I'll often give my athletes. Hey, let's start working on the hips back first, because if you do actually move your knees first and do that, there's a good chance that you're actually going to load those knees improperly, especially when you go into a rack position. So hips back, hips should move first. That should be the first joint that moves in a squat, not the ankles and not the knees. Next point is, where is your center of mass? When you're racked with a bar, which I'll show in a second, the center of mass or the bar should be over the middle of the foot, and the bar path straight up and down. And this is where people, if you take some video of yourself squatting, you can pick up these pretty quickly by looking at them in slow motion. So hips moving first, bar staying center of mass, and knees tracking over the toes, which we'll talk about in a second. And then the other part is keeping the feet flat. If you're doing this and the heels start coming up, that's a problem. Heels should be in contact with the ground, feet flat on the floor, bar straight up and down, and center of mass over the middle of your foot. Lastly, the knees from the front should be tracking together simultaneously, and they should be relatively tracking over the knees, over the toes. So what do I mean by that? A lot of times you'll see folks end up squatting like this, or even too much out like that, and the front inside of the feet come off the ground. When you're down, the knees should be tracking straight over the front of the foot. So if we're doing those things, if we have good ankle range of motion, good hip range of motion, solid firing patterns in our posterior chain, if our feet are firmly planted on the floor, if the bar and load are racked with center of mass over the middle of the foot, then we don't really have to care about how far the knees travel, because honestly, there's a lot of variety in human anatomy. Some folks have long femurs, some folks have long shins, so you can't just put one blanket statement down, the knees should never travel past the toes. I hope that helps clarify the myth about knees traveling past the toes. It's been Dr. Scott with Full Body Fix. We'll see you next time.